she overheard her millionaire husband telling his mother, "I'll divorce her on her birthday, she will cry." But she had other plans. Her 3 shocking birthday gifts left everyone speechless. Half his wealth, his mother's secret affair with the servant, and a final surprise that shook the entire family, and will shock my beautiful family too. Hi, my most beautiful family, let me start with prayer. May every woman in this family walk with dignity and strength. May every mother, sister, and daughter be loved and honored. May every home be filled with joy, and may your hearts never feel lonely. Amen. My stories have always lifted women high, because without women there is no love, no family, no tomorrow. Here in Mr. Peter's family, women are celebrated, never broken. But my family, I must be honest, it hurts when many of you leave the story halfway, not because of numbers, but because it feels like my hard work means nothing. Still, I cannot stay angry, because my love for you is greater than my pain. When you watch until the end, you are not just watching, you are saying, "Mr. Peter, we are with you." That unity gives me strength to keep writing with love. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Let's start with love. Paul Hogan's hands trembled as they held his wife's face, not from nervousness, but from the overwhelming gratitude that this incredible woman had chosen him, chosen to give him her heart, her soul, her everything. "You're shaking," Melina Bavuma Hogan whispered, her voice soft with concern as thunder rolled across their Connecticut estate. 6 months of marriage, and she still noticed every tremor, every breath, every heartbeat of the man she'd sworn to love forever. "Because I can't believe you're real," Paul confessed, his blue eyes drinking in her beautiful face illuminated by candlelight. "Every morning I wake up terrified this is all a dream, that I'll lose you." Melina's laugh was like music as she placed her hands over his. "Then stop thinking and feel this," she breathed, guiding his palm to her heart where it pounded wild and fierce. "Feel how alive I am with you. Feel how completely I'm yours." The storm outside seemed to mirror the tempest of passion between them as Paul pulled her against him, his lips finding hers in a kiss so deep and hungry it stole her breath. When they made love, it wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, a complete merging of 2 souls that had found their other half. Every touch sent fire through their veins, every kiss a promise of forever. "Forever," Paul murmured against her forehead as rain lashed the windows. "Promise me forever, Melina." "Forever and 3 days more," she replied, their secret phrase that never failed to make him smile. It was what she'd whispered at their wedding altar when the priest asked for her vows, and the congregation had laughed, but Paul had known exactly what she meant, that even forever wasn't long enough for a love this deep. Later, as they lay entwined in silk sheets, bodies still humming from their passionate lovemaking, Paul traced invisible words across Melina's bare shoulder with his fingertips, a nightly ritual that made her shiver with pleasure. "What are you writing tonight?" she asked, studying his face. Even in the dim light she could see the wonder there, the same awestruck expression he'd worn since their first date when she'd laughed at his terrible joke about architecture and he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love. "How much I need you," he admitted, vulnerability clear in his voice. "How you're not just my wife, you're my oxygen, my heartbeat, my reason for existing." Melina's eyes filled with tears of pure joy. This beautiful man, this gentle giant of 32 who owned half the construction companies on the East Coast, who commanded respect from powerful men in expensive suits, melted completely in her presence. And she loved him so fiercely it sometimes scared her with its intensity. "Dance with me," she said suddenly, slipping from the bed and wrapping herself in his soft robe. "Right here, right now." "There's no music," he protested weakly, but he was already rising, already reaching for her like he couldn't help himself. "We don't need music," Melina smiled, taking his hands as lightning illuminated their bedroom. We have the storm. They swayed together in the darkness, heartbeat against heartbeat, while nature's symphony played around them. Paul buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of vanilla and jasmine that always surrounded her. I used to think love was a luxury, he confessed, as they moved to music only they could hear. Something nice to have, but not necessary. Then I met you, and I realized I'd been suffocating my whole life without knowing it. Melina pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. And now? Now I know that loving you isn't just what I do, Paul whispered, his forehead touching hers. It's who I am. Without you, I'm just a shell walking around pretending to be alive. The intensity of his words made her breath catch. In the 6 months since their wedding, Paul had never stopped courting her, never stopped treating each day with her like a precious gift that might be taken away. Some nights she'd catch him watching her read or cook or simply exist, and the reverence in his gaze made her feel like the most treasured woman who'd ever lived. "Show me," she whispered against his lips, and he didn't need to be asked twice. They made love again as the storm raged, slower this time, savoring every caress, every passionate kiss, every whispered declaration of love. Paul worshipped her body with tender reverence, and Melina surrendered completely to their burning desire. Afterward, they lay breathless and content, limbs tangled, hearts synchronized. "I have a confession," Melina said softly, tracing patterns on Paul's chest. "Sometimes I pinch myself to make sure this is real, that you're real, that someone like me gets to have someone like you." Paul's arms tightened around her protectively. "Someone like you?" "Melina, you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Your kindness, your intelligence, the way you see beauty in everything, you make me want to be worthy of you every single day." "You already are," she assured him, pressing a kiss over his heart. "More than worthy. You're my perfect match, Paul Hogan, my other half, my home." Later, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, they lay peaceful in each other's arms. Paul's fingers drew lazy circles on Melina's shoulder as she rested against his chest, her breathing deep and content. "I love our life," she murmured, without opening her eyes. "I love this house. I love our bedroom. I love waking up next to you every morning. I love how you leave little notes in my coffee cup and how you bring me wildflowers from the garden just because it's Tuesday." Paul smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "I love how you sing when you cook, even though you can't carry a tune to save your life. I love how you read to me from those romance novels and act out all the voices. I love how you make everything brighter just by being in the room." "We're ridiculous," Melina laughed, tilting her head to look at him. 6 months married, and we're still in the honeymoon phase." "Good," Paul said fiercely, his eyes blazing with loving devotion. "I never want to stop being crazy about my wife. I never want to stop falling in love with you every single day." Melina's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. "Promise?" "I promise," Paul vowed, sealing it with a kiss so passionate it left them both breathless, lips swollen from desire. "You're stuck with my devotion for life, Mrs. Hogan." They spent the morning making breakfast together, Paul stealing kisses, while Melina tried to flip pancakes, both of them laughing when the batter ended up on the floor instead of the griddle. It was domestic and perfect, and exactly the kind of simple happiness Melina had dreamed of but never expected to find. Their love felt infinite in these quiet moments, Paul humming off-key while he squeezed fresh orange juice, Melina feeding him strawberries and stealing sips of his coffee. They moved around each other in their sun-drenched kitchen, with the easy choreography of two people completely at home in their shared space. "I had the strangest dream last night," Paul said as they sat at their kitchen island, sharing fruit and coffee, legs intertwined. "We were old and grey, sitting on a porch somewhere, and you were still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen." Hopefully by then I'll have learned to sing in tune, Melina teased, but her eyes were soft with emotion. Don't you dare, Paul grinned, pulling her hand to his lips to kiss her fingertips. Your off-key humming is one of my favorite sounds in the world. It means you're happy. I am happy, Melina said simply. Deliriously, impossibly, completely happy. Oh, I almost forgot, Paul said as they finished their leisurely breakfast. Mother called yesterday while you were at your book club. Melina looked up, noting something careful in his tone. Paul rarely mentioned his mother, and she'd always assumed it was because they weren't close. Is everything all right? She's fine, Paul assured her quickly. She wants to visit, to meet you properly. I know I should have asked first, but I told her yes. Of course. Melina's face lit up with genuine excitement. Paul, I've been wondering when I'd get to meet her. I want to know the woman who raised such an incredible man. Relief flooded Paul's features. Really? You're not upset that I said yes without asking? Are you kidding? Melina laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I'm thrilled. When is she coming? She'll be here for several months, Paul said, spinning her around their kitchen. Fair warning, though, she can be particular. She's very set in her ways. I'm sure we'll get along wonderfully, Melina said confidently, already mentally planning menus and preparing the guest room. I can't wait to hear embarrassing stories about you as a little boy, Paul groaned dramatically. I'm already regretting this. But as they dissolved into laughter, neither of them noticed the shadow that seemed to pass over their perfect morning, or how the sunshine streaming through their windows flickered just for a moment, as if something dark was approaching their paradise. In her excitement to meet her mother-in-law, Melina missed the worry lines that briefly creased Paul's forehead, and the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he spoke of his mother's extended visit. If she had noticed, she might have prepared differently for the storm that was about to shatter their perfect world. Chapter 2. The Serpent Enters Eden. The black limousine rolled up their circular driveway like a hearse arriving for a funeral, and Melina felt her first shiver of unease as she watched from their bedroom window, Paul's arms wrapped around her waist from behind. She's here, Paul murmured against her neck, but something in his voice made Melina turn in his embrace. You sound nervous, she observed, studying his face. It's your mother, Paul. She raised you, loved you. Why wouldn't she love me too? Paul's smile was strained as he kissed her forehead. Of course she will. How could she not? But as they watched a woman emerge from the limousine like a queen stepping from her carriage, Melina understood Paul's tension. Xiomara Hogan was breathtaking in the way a winter storm was beautiful, magnificent, and dangerous. Even at 62, she moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her tailored black dress making her look like she belonged on magazine covers rather than suburban driveways. She's stunning, Melina breathed, suddenly conscious of her simple sundress and casual ponytail. She knows it too, Paul muttered, then caught himself. I mean, she's always been very particular about appearances. Melina squeezed his hand reassuringly. I'll go change into something nicer. No. Paul's grip tightened on her waist, pulling her back against his chest. You're perfect exactly as you are. If she can't see that, it's her loss. But as they descended the stairs together, Melina couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a battle she didn't know how to fight. Xiomara stood in their foyer like she owned it, her calculating green eyes taking inventory of everything, the fresh flowers Melina had arranged that morning, the family photos on the side table, the warm, honey-colored walls that made the space feel like home. Her expression revealed nothing, but Melina sensed judgment in every glance. Mother, Paul said, approaching cautiously. Welcome. Xiomara offered her cheek for a kiss, which Paul delivered dutifully. Paul, darling, you look tired. Marriage wearing you down already? The words hit like ice water, but Xiomara's smile was perfectly pleasant as she turned those piercing eyes on Melina. "And you must be the little bride I've heard so much about." "I'm Melina," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm so happy to finally meet you, Mrs. Hogan. Paul speaks of you constantly." "Does he?" Xiomara's handshake was brief and cool. "How sweet. Though I must say, Paul, you didn't mention how exotic your wife is." The word exotic dripped with subtle poison, but Melina's smile never wavered. "I prefer unique, actually. Paul always says I'm one of a kind. I'm sure he does." Xiomara's gaze swept over Melina's appearance with surgical precision. "Though I suppose every man thinks his first real infatuation is special." "It's not infatuation," Paul interjected sharply. "I love her." "Of course you do, darling." Xiomara patted his arm condescendingly. "Young love is so intense." Melina felt Paul's muscles tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand gently, a silent message to stay calm. "Mrs. Hogan, you must be exhausted from traveling. Let me show you to your room so you can rest before dinner." "How thoughtful," Xiomara said, following Melina up the stairs. "Paul, have Rodriguez bring in my luggage, all of it." Melina's heart sank slightly at the word all. How much luggage did one need for a visit? But she pushed the thought aside, determined to make this work. The guest room Melina had prepared was a masterpiece of hospitality. Fresh white lilies filled crystal vases. Egyptian cotton sheets were turned down invitingly, and she'd even placed a basket of imported chocolates and French champagne on the dresser. "How quaint," Xiomara observed, running a manicured finger along the antique dresser. "Very rustic. I suppose it has a certain charm if you enjoy the country cottage aesthetic." "I decorated it myself," Melina said proudly. "I wanted you to feel at home." "How kind." Xiomara's smile was sharp as a blade. "Though I must admit, I'm more accustomed to sophisticated surroundings, but one adapts." The criticism landed like a slap, but Melina refused to show it hurt. "I hope you'll be comfortable. Dinner will be at 7. I'm making Paul's favorite lamb with rosemary from our garden." "You cook?" Xiomara sounded surprised. "How domestic." Paul's father always insisted on professional chefs. He said a woman's place might be in the home, but not necessarily in the kitchen. "I love cooking for Paul," Melina replied honestly. "Taking care of the people you love brings joy." "How wonderfully old-fashioned." Xiomara's tone suggested this wasn't a compliment. "Though I do hope you have other skills. A man like Paul needs intellectual stimulation, cultural refinement. He's quite accomplished, you know. Harvard Business School, master's degree, speaks 3 languages. Tell me, dear, what's your educational background?" The question was delivered like a surgical strike, designed to expose weakness. Melina lifted her chin proudly. "I have my bachelor's degree in literature from State University. I was working as a librarian when Paul and I met." "A librarian." Xiomara repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "How practical. And your family? What does your father do?" "He passed away when I was 16. My mother raised me alone. She's a nurse." "I see." Xiomara's expression conveyed everything those 2 words didn't say. Working class, single-parent household, beneath our standards. "If you'll excuse me," Melina said, her voice steady despite the burning in her chest, "I should start dinner preparations." She escaped to the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she began seasoning the lamb. She'd known this wouldn't be easy. Wealthy families often had expectations, preferences, but the deliberate cruelty in Xiomara's politeness was something she hadn't anticipated. "Hey." Paul's arm slid around her waist from behind, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear. "You okay?" "Your mother is formidable," Melina said carefully, leaning back against his solid chest. She's being awful, isn't she? Paul's voice was heavy with guilt. I should have warned you better. Mother has very specific ideas about what constitutes suitable company. It's fine, Melina lied, turning in his arms. She just wants what's best for you. She'll warm up once she gets to know me. Paul cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. You're incredible, you know that. Any other woman would be throwing plates by now. I'm not any other woman, Melina smiled, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. I'm your woman, and I'll fight for this family, even if the battle is with your mother. I love you, Paul breathed against her lips, deepening the kiss until she melted against him. More than anything in this world. I love you too, she whispered back, letting his passion wash away the sting of Xiomara's words. They might have stayed there forever, lost in each other, if Xiomara's voice hadn't cut through the air like a knife. How touching, she said from the kitchen doorway, her tone suggesting it was anything but. I do hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Paul stepped protectively in front of Melina, but kept her hand firmly in his. Just telling my wife how beautiful she is. Naturally. Xiomara's smile was razor-thin. Young men do tend to be demonstrative. I thought I might help with dinner, Melina dear. After all, cooking for discerning palates can be so challenging. That's very kind, Melina replied, though every instinct screamed that accepting help from this woman was a mistake. I'd appreciate the company. What followed was an hour of delicate warfare. Xiomara criticized every choice. The seasoning was too bold, the vegetables cut too rustically, the wine selection pedestrian. Each comment was delivered with a sweet smile and couched as helpful suggestion, making it impossible for Melina to object without seeming ungrateful. Paul has such refined tastes, Xiomara explained as she rearranged Melina's perfectly plated entrees. His father and I took great care to expose him to the finer things in life. French cuisine, Italian wines, Japanese presentation techniques. We felt it was our duty to cultivate sophistication. I'm sure he appreciates everything you taught him, Melina said through gritted teeth, watching this woman dismantle hours of her careful work. Oh, I hope so, Xiomara sighed dramatically, though sometimes I worry that marriage to the wrong person can diminish a person, make them forget who they truly are. The words hung in the air like poison gas, and Melina felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just snobbery or overprotectiveness. This was war. Dinner itself was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Xiomara regaled them with stories of Paul's childhood, each one designed to highlight the world he came from: private schools, country clubs, debutante balls, and European vacations. She spoke of his ex-girlfriend Charlotte, a senator's daughter who understood Paul's background so well and fit so naturally into our social circle. Whatever happened to Charlotte? Xiomara asked innocently. Such a lovely girl, beautiful family, impeccable breeding. I always thought you two would end up together. Mother, Paul warned, his jaw tight. I'm just curious, darling. She was so perfect for you. Same social circle, same values, same level of sophistication. Melina felt each word like a physical blow, but she kept her voice steady. Paul chose me, Mrs. Hogan. That's all that matters. Of course, dear. Xiomara's smile was venomous, though I often find that people marry for such different reasons. Love, security, social advancement. The motivations can be so complex. What are you implying? Paul's voice was dangerously quiet. Nothing at all, Paul. I'm simply observing that your sweet wife has certainly elevated her circumstances since meeting you. From a little librarian to mistress of all this. She gestured around their elegant dining room. How fortunate. The accusation hit its target perfectly. Melina felt the blood drain from her face as the implication sank in, that she was a gold digger, a social climber who trapped Paul with sex and manipulation. That's enough, Paul snapped, throwing down his napkin. "I won't have you insult my wife in our own home." "Insult?" Xiomara looked genuinely shocked. "Paul, darling, I would never. I'm simply trying to understand what drew you to someone so different from what we discussed for your future." "We never discussed my future wife." "Didn't we?" Xiomara's eyes glittered with triumph. "All those conversations about finding someone worthy of the Hogan name, someone who could stand beside you as an equal, not someone you'd have to elevate." Melina watched in horror as doubt flickered across Paul's face. For just a moment, he looked at her like he was seeing a stranger, and she realized with crystal clarity that this was exactly what Xiomara had intended. "Excuse me," Melina said quietly, rising from the table. "I need some air." She walked out onto their terrace with as much dignity as she could muster, but inside she was screaming. Paul followed moments later, his face etched with guilt and confusion. "Melina, I'm sorry. She had no right." "She's your mother," Melina interrupted, staring out at the gardens she'd planted with such love. "She's trying to protect you from what she sees as a mistake." "You're not a mistake," Paul said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "Are you sure?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she hated how small her voice sounded. "Yes," Paul said without hesitation, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He kissed her then, desperate and claiming, as if he could pour all his certainty into her through touch alone. Melina clung to him, letting his passion reassure her wounded heart. But even as they held each other in the moonlight, she could feel Xiomara's presence like a shadow over their happiness. The older woman had planted her first seeds of doubt, and Melina knew this was only the beginning. When they finally went back inside, Xiomara was nowhere to be found. But on the kitchen counter sat a note in elegant script. "Thank you for a lovely evening. I do hope we can become friends. After all, we both want what's best for Paul. X." Melina crumpled the note in her fist, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just been declared war upon by a master strategist who played to win. As she lay in Paul's arms that night, feeling his body relax into sleep, she stared at the ceiling and wondered how long their perfect love could withstand the poison that had just entered their paradise. Outside their window, a cold wind began to blow. Chapter 3. The Poison Takes Root. The shattered remains of Melina's grandmother's china lay scattered across the kitchen floor like broken dreams, each piece reflecting the morning sunlight that had seemed so promising just moments before. "Oh my goodness, how clumsy of me," Xiomara gasped, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest as she surveyed the destruction. "I was just trying to help by putting away the clean dishes, and it simply slipped from my fingers." Melina stared at the ruins of the tea set that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and her grandmother's journey from Jamaica to America. The delicate roses painted on the porcelain that had graced 3 generations of Sunday dinners now lay in pieces, irreplaceable and irreparable. It's okay," Melina managed, though her voice cracked on the words. "Accidents happen." "You're being so gracious about this," Xiomara cooed, but there was something glittering in her green eyes that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Though I must say, dear, perhaps antique china shouldn't be stored so high up. It's rather impractical, don't you think? If you must keep sentimental pieces, they should really be properly secured." The implication was clear. This was somehow Melina's fault for having the audacity to store her family heirlooms in her own kitchen. She knelt among the broken pieces, carefully gathering the larger fragments, hoping against hope that something might be salvageable. "What happened?" Paul's voice came from the doorway, and Melina looked up to see him taking in the scene with confusion and concern. "I'm afraid I've had a little accident with Melina's dishes," Xiomara said before Melina could speak. "She stored them so precariously on that high shelf, And when I tried to help put away the breakfast things, well, she gestured helplessly at the wreckage. Paul's gaze shifted between his mother and his wife, and Melina saw something that made her heart sink, a flicker of irritation directed at her. "Melina, why would you put fragile dishes up there? You know how dangerous that is." "I've kept them there for 2 years without any problems," Melina said quietly, still gathering pieces. "They were perfectly safe." "Clearly not," Paul snapped, then immediately looked stricken by his own harsh tone. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I just don't understand why you'd risk something so precious to you." "Perhaps," Xiomara interjected smoothly, "it would be better if I handled the kitchen arrangements while I'm here. I have experience with proper organization, and we wouldn't want any more accidents." Melina's hands stilled on the broken china. In one masterful stroke, Xiomara had destroyed her property, made it seem like Melina's fault, turned Paul against her, and positioned herself as the solution to a problem she'd created. "That won't be necessary," Melina said firmly, rising to her feet with the fragments cradled in her palms like wounded birds. "I can manage my own kitchen." "Of course you can, dear," Xiomara agreed with a patronizing smile. "I'm simply offering to help. After all, we're family now." But as Melina disposed of the broken pieces, she caught Xiomara's reflection in the kitchen window and saw the woman's satisfied smirk. This had been no accident. This had been the opening move in a carefully orchestrated campaign. Over the following days, the attacks intensified with surgical precision. Xiomara criticized everything from Melina's choice of morning newspaper, so tabloidish, dear, to her preferred brands of coffee. "I'm sure it's fine for those with simpler tastes." Each comment was delivered with a sweet smile and framed as helpful advice, making Melina look ungrateful if she objected. "Paul mentioned you studied literature," Xiomara said one afternoon as they sat in the garden, watching Paul work in his home office through the window. "How quaint. Of course, practical degrees are so much more valuable these days. Business, law, medicine, fields that actually contribute to society." "Literature contributes to society," Melina replied evenly, though her fingers tightened on her book. "Stories shape how we understand ourselves and others." "I suppose that's one way to look at it," Xiomara mused, her tone suggesting it was a very naive way indeed. "Though I must say, it doesn't exactly prepare one for the realities of life, does it? Managing finances, understanding business, navigating social expectations. These are skills that actually matter in the real world." "Paul fell in love with who I am," Melina said quietly, "not my degree or my social status." "Oh, sweet child," Xiomara laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You really believe that, don't you? Paul is a romantic, it's true, but he's also practical. He understands that love isn't enough to build a life on. Compatibility matters. Shared backgrounds, similar values, complementary skills." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Between you and me, dear, I think Paul is beginning to realize that passion fades, but partnership endures, and partners need to be equals." The words burrowed into Melina's mind like poison, finding every insecurity and doubt she'd tried to suppress. Was Paul really beginning to see her differently? Had the newlywed bliss blinded her to his growing dissatisfaction? That evening, as she prepared dinner, Melina found herself second-guessing every choice. Was the salmon too simple? Should she have chosen a more sophisticated wine? When Paul came home from work, would he see a loving wife or an inadequate partner? "Something smells amazing," Paul said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and nuzzling her neck. "Just salmon," Melina said, leaning back against his chest but unable to fully relax. "My favorite," Paul murmured, his hands roaming over her curves. "Almost as delicious as you." He turned her in his arms and kissed her deeply, his passion as intense as ever. But even as Melina melted into his embrace, Xiomara's words echoed in her mind. Passion fades, but partnership endures. "How was your day?" she asked when they broke apart, studying his face for any signs of the dissatisfaction his mother claimed to see. "Stressful," Paul admitted, loosening his tie. "The Morrison project is hitting snags, and I've got 3 other deadlines looming. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for running the family business." "Of course you are," Melina said automatically. "You're brilliant and capable and—" "Am I?" Paul interrupted, his voice heavy with doubt. "Mother thinks I've been distracted lately, unfocused. She says I'm not living up to my potential." Melina felt a chill run down her spine. "She said that?" "Not in so many words," Paul backtracked quickly. "She's just concerned about my stress levels. She thinks maybe I'm trying to juggle too much at once." Like a new wife, Melina thought, but didn't say. Instead, she reached up to cup his face in her hands. "You're not juggling too much. You're building a life with the woman you love. That's not a distraction. It's motivation." Paul's smile was soft and grateful as he leaned into her touch. "What would I do without you?" "You'll never have to find out," Melina promised, pulling him down for another kiss. But later that night, as Paul slept peacefully beside her, Melina stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was fighting a war she'd already lost. Xiomara was a master strategist, attacking not just Melina's confidence, but Paul's as well, making him question everything about his life since their marriage. The next morning brought a new assault. Melina came downstairs to find Xiomara rearranging the living room furniture, moving pieces that had been carefully positioned to create intimate conversation areas. "I hope you don't mind," Xiomara said without looking up from her work. "I thought the room could use a more sophisticated flow. The current arrangement is so casual." "I like it casual," Melina said, watching this woman systematically erase her personal touches from the space. "This is our home, not a museum." "Of course, dear," Xiomara agreed placidly. "Though when one entertains frequently, proper flow becomes essential. Paul mentioned you rarely have guests, perhaps because the current setup doesn't encourage social interaction." Another perfectly aimed strike. Paul had mentioned feeling isolated from their old social circle, wondering if married life was making him antisocial. Melina had assured him they could host more dinner parties once they settled into their routine, but now Xiomara was making it seem like the house itself was inhospitable. "We're still newlyweds," Melina defended. "We're focusing on each other right now." "How romantic," Xiomara smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Though I do worry about Paul becoming too insular. He was always such a social creature, so popular with everyone. It would be a shame if marriage changed that about him." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "If marriage to you changed that about him." That afternoon, Paul came home early to find the living room transformed into something that belonged in an architectural magazine rather than a family home. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like relief. "It looks different," he said carefully. "Your mother thought it needed better flow," Melina explained, watching his face closely. "It does look more sophisticated," Paul admitted, and Melina's heart sank. "Maybe we should have people over soon, the Harrisons, the Mitchells. It's been too long since we've entertained." "Of course," Melina agreed, but inside she was screaming. These were Paul's old friends from his bachelor days, people who had known him before her, people who might look at her the same way Xiomara did, as an interloper who didn't belong. "Wonderful." Xiomara clapped her hands together. "I'll help you plan the menu, Melina dear. Entertaining Paul's social circle requires a certain finesse." Over the following week, Xiomara's campaign intensified. She found fault with everything Melina did, always framed as helpful suggestion. The house wasn't clean enough, the meals weren't sophisticated enough, Melina's clothes weren't appropriate enough for a woman in her position. "You represent the Hogan name now," Xiomara explained as she watched Melina fold laundry. "People will judge Paul based on how you present yourself. Perhaps we should go shopping together. I know some wonderful boutiques that cater to women who need to elevate their image." Each comment chipped away at Melina's confidence, but worse was watching their effect on Paul. He began noticing things he'd never seen before, or things Xiomara pointed out to him with subtle precision. "Don't you think Melina looks tired lately?" she'd murmur to him when she thought Melina couldn't hear. "Perhaps the stress of trying to fit into your world is taking its toll." Has Melina always been so withdrawn around company? She barely spoke at dinner with the Harrisons. "I'm concerned about her, Paul. She seems so anxious all the time, like she's afraid of making mistakes." Paul began looking at his wife with new eyes, seeing insecurity where before he'd seen confidence, awkwardness where he'd once found charm. He started offering helpful suggestions that felt like criticism, encouragement that sounded like doubt. "Maybe you should let Mother help you choose an outfit for the Mitchells' party," he said one morning, as Melina stood before her closet in frustration. "She has great taste." "What's wrong with my taste?" Melina asked, hurt bleeding through her voice. "Nothing," Paul said quickly. I want you to feel confident. Mother knows what these people expect." What these people expect. Not what Paul expected, not what would make her happy, but what his mother's social circle would approve of. Melina felt like she was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by some manufactured version of herself designed to meet Xiomara's standards. The breaking point came during Mitchell's dinner party. Melina had spent hours preparing, wearing the dress Xiomara had chosen, serving the menu they'd planned together. But nothing was right. The wine wasn't properly chilled, the conversation topics weren't engaging enough, and when Mrs. Mitchell complimented the meal, Xiomara smoothly took credit for guiding Melina through the planning process. Later, as their guests were leaving, Melina overheard Mrs. Harrison whisper to her husband, "She seems nice enough, but so different from Charlotte. Remember how perfectly she fit in? This one looks like she's trying so hard." The words hit like physical blows, and Melina excused herself to the bathroom to collect herself. When she emerged, she found Paul and his mother in quiet conversation by the front door. "Worry about her," Xiomara was saying. "She's trying so hard to be something she's not. It's painful to watch." "She's just nervous," Paul defended, but his voice lacked conviction. "She wants to make a good impression." "Of course she does, darling. But you can't build a marriage on someone pretending to be who they're not. Eventually, the real person shows through." Melina felt something cold and hard settle in her chest as she realized what was happening. Xiomara wasn't just trying to drive her away. She was trying to make Paul fall out of love with her. Every criticism, every suggestion, every helpful comment was designed to transform Melina from Paul's beloved wife into a disappointing burden. And it was working. That night, as they lay in bed, Paul was distant in a way he'd never been before. When Melina tried to initiate their usual passionate connection, he seemed distracted, going through the motions without the fire that had always burned between them. "Are you okay?" she whispered afterward, tracing patterns on his chest. "Just tired," Paul murmured. But he didn't pull her closer the way he usually did. Long day. As he drifted off to sleep, Melina stared into the darkness and realized with crystal clarity that she was losing the war. Xiomara's poison was working its way through their marriage like acid, dissolving the bonds of trust and passion that had once seemed unbreakable. But as she lay there, feeling more alone than she had since her father's death, Melina made a decision. She wouldn't go down without a fight. If Xiomara wanted to play psychological warfare, then she'd better prepare for an opponent who had more to lose than pride. The question was, how do you fight an enemy who attacks with kindness and kills with concern? Outside their window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Chapter 4. Love Under Siege. The legal documents scattered across Paul's desk looked innocent enough, but as Melina read the partnership agreements while dusting, her world shifted completely. Spousal rights and asset distribution, she read silently, heart pounding as the legal language made sense. Due to Paul's specific business partnership structure and Connecticut's property laws, she discovered something shocking. When Paul restructured his companies after their marriage, he'd inadvertently created shared ownership. The legal documents showed she was entitled to significant marital assets, including portions of the construction empire and real estate acquired during marriage. She'd married him for love, never caring about money. But now, staring at these documents, she realized she wasn't just the librarian who'd captured a wealthy man's heart. She was a woman with real power. "What are you doing in here?" Melina spun to find Xiomara in the doorway, green eyes sharp as they took in the scene, Melina surrounded by Paul's private papers. "I was just dusting," Melina said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." "Of course not, dear." Xiomara glided closer, gaze never leaving the documents. "Though those look rather personal, Paul is so particular about his privacy." The threat was wrapped in silk. "I was putting them back," Melina said, but Xiomara had moved close enough to see exactly what she'd been reading. "Partnership agreements," Xiomara observed neutrally. "How interesting that you'd be dusting those particular documents." The implication was crystal clear. Xiomara thought she'd been snooping for information about Paul's wealth. The gold digger narrative was about to explode. "It's not what you think," Melina began. "Oh, sweet child, I don't think anything," Xiomara smiled with surgical precision. "It's natural for new wives to be curious about their husband's assets. Though I hope Paul doesn't feel you're taking undue interest in his financial affairs. Men can be so sensitive." The threat was delivered perfectly. Xiomara would tell Paul about this, spin it to make Melina look exactly like what she'd accused her of being, a calculating woman investigating her potential windfall. Chapter 5. The web of lies tightens. The photograph landed on Paul's desk like a bomb designed to detonate their marriage, and from her position in the hallway, Melina watched her husband's face transform from confusion to devastation to cold, terrible rage. "I'm so sorry you had to see this," Xiomara whispered, her voice trembling with perfectly performed anguish. "I debated whether to show you, but I couldn't let you live a lie." Paul stared at the image, clearly doctored but expertly done, showing Melina in what appeared to be a passionate embrace with James, their regular delivery man. The angle was perfect, the lighting convincing, and to someone already poisoned by doubt, it would look absolutely real. "When was this taken?" Paul's voice was barely human, raw with betrayal. "Yesterday afternoon," Xiomara replied, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I saw them from the upstairs window and, oh, Paul, I wanted to be wrong so badly. But then I saw her slip him something, money, I think, and I realized this has been going on for some time." Melina's blood turned to ice as she witnessed the masterpiece of manipulation. Xiomara had taken her innocent conversation with James about his sick daughter, during which she'd given him extra money for medicine, and turned it into evidence of a sordid affair. "Where is she now?" Paul asked, his hands shaking as he held the photograph. "In the garden, I believe. Paul, darling, you must confront her carefully. Women like this, they can be dangerous when cornered. Women like this." The phrase hit Melina like a physical blow. In Xiomara's mind, she wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a type, a category of manipulative woman who trapped good men with lies and sex. Melina fled upstairs before Paul could find her, her mind reeling. How do you defend yourself against evidence that looks so real? How do you explain that you've been set up by a woman who's spent weeks laying the groundwork for your destruction? 20 minutes later, Paul found her in their bedroom, and the man who walked through that door was a stranger. Gone was the gentle giant who'd worshipped her body and soul. In his place stood a cold, calculating adversary whose blue eyes held nothing but contempt. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door with ominous finality. "Paul, whatever your mother told you, don't." His voice cut through her words like a blade. "Don't lie to me anymore. I've seen the photograph." Melina's heart shattered as she realized how completely Xiomara had won. What photograph? Paul threw the image on their bed, and Melina stared at it in shock. It was her face, her body, but the embrace with James had never happened. The technology was sophisticated enough to fool anyone who wanted to believe the worst. "This isn't real," she whispered. "Paul, you know me. You know I would never—" "Do I?" Paul's laugh was bitter. "Because looking back, I'm starting to see a pattern. The way you married me so quickly, how eager you were to move into this house, your sudden interest in my business papers." Each accusation was a dagger to her heart. "I married you because I love you." "You married me because I was convenient," Paul corrected, his voice growing colder with each word. "A lonely rich man, so grateful for attention that I didn't ask the right questions. Tell me, how long have you been planning this? Did you target me specifically, or was I just lucky enough to be the first wealthy fool who fell for your act?" The cruelty in his words took her breath away. This was the man who'd traced love letters on her skin, who'd whispered that she was his religion, his reason for breathing. Now he looked at her like she was something poisonous he'd accidentally touched. "I never wanted your money," Melina said desperately. "I didn't even know how much you had when we married." "Right," Paul sneered. "That's why you were so carefully reading my partnership agreements yesterday. Just casual dusting, was it?" Melina realized with horror that every innocent action had been twisted into evidence against her. Her dust cloth had become proof of snooping, her kindness to James had become adultery, her love had become calculation. "Paul, please," she begged, reaching for him. "Look at me. Really look at me. Don't you see how much I love you?" For a moment his mask slipped, and she saw the pain underneath, the devastation of a man whose heart had been shattered. But then Xiomara's poison reasserted itself, and his face hardened again. "I see a woman who's very good at playing a role," he said coldly. "The question is, what do you want? A divorce settlement? Monthly alimony? Or are you planning to take me for everything I'm worth?" The words hit like physical blows. "I don't want anything from you except your love." "My love." Paul's laugh was hollow. "You had that. You had all of it. And you threw it away for what? A few stolen moments with the delivery boy. Was I that inadequate as a husband?" "You were perfect," Melina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You are perfect. This is all lies, Paul. Your mother is manipulating both of us." "Leave my mother out of this," Paul snapped. "She's the only one who's been honest with me. She saw what you really were from the beginning, and I was too blinded by lust to listen." The word lust landed like a slap. Their beautiful love had been reduced to base physical attraction, their spiritual connection dismissed as sexual infatuation. "I'm sleeping in the guest room," Paul announced, moving toward their closet to gather clothes. "And I want you to stay away from me until I decide what to do about this marriage." "Paul, wait!" "No." He turned back to her, and the ice in his eyes froze her soul. "I trusted you with everything I had, and you made a fool of me. Whatever we had is over, Melina. You killed it." He left her alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the ruins of their love. Melina collapsed on their bed, sobbing into the sheets that still smelled like him. like the passion they'd shared just days before. Over the following week, Paul treated her like a stranger living in his house. He spoke only when necessary, avoided being alone with her, and when their eyes accidentally met, she saw nothing but cold disgust. The man who'd once made love to her with desperate passion now couldn't bear to be in the same room. Meanwhile, Xiomara played the concerned mother-in-law perfectly. She brought Paul comfort food, listened sympathetically to his pain, and offered subtle advice about protecting himself from further manipulation. "I know this is difficult, darling," she'd coo, "but you must think practically now. Women like Melina, they don't just walk away, they take what they can get." During this nightmare week, Melina discovered the truth she'd been suspecting. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines that should have brought joy, but instead filled her with terror. She was carrying Paul's child, the child of a man who now believed she was a lying, cheating gold digger. How could she tell him? How could she share this miraculous news with someone who looked at her with such hatred? Would he even believe the baby was his, or would Xiomara convince him that, too, was part of some elaborate scheme? That evening, as Paul worked late in his study, Melina stood outside the door listening to his phone conversation with his lawyer. "I want to know my options," Paul was saying. "Adultery, fraud, whatever applies. I want this done quickly and completely." "Paul," his lawyer's voice was cautious, "are you certain about this? Marriage counseling might—" "There's nothing to counsel," Paul interrupted. "My wife is a liar and a cheat. I want her out of my life." Melina pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, where Paul's child grew in secret. The baby would be born into a world where its parents were enemies, where its mother was branded a villain and its father consumed by manufactured hatred. But even as despair threatened to drown her, a spark of defiance flickered to life. She had 3 secrets that could change everything: her legal claim to half his wealth, proof of Xiomara's affair, and now the pregnancy. The question was when and how to use them. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, now hers alone, Melina made a decision. She would not go quietly into the night. She would not let Xiomara's lies destroy the greatest love she'd ever known, without a fight. But first, she needed to survive long enough to plan her counterattack. Because looking at Paul's face today, she realized that Xiomara wasn't just trying to end their marriage, she was trying to destroy Melina completely. Outside, storm clouds gathered with increasing fury, promising a tempest that would either wash them all clean or drown them in the ruins of what had once been love. Chapter 6. Hearts breaking in silence. The silence at the breakfast table was so thick it could be cut with a knife, and Melina felt each passing second like a physical weight pressing down on her chest as Paul read his newspaper with deliberate indifference to her presence. 3 weeks had passed since the photograph destroyed their marriage, and Paul had perfected the art of treating his wife like furniture, necessary but unworthy of acknowledgement. He ate the breakfast she prepared without thanks, used the clothes she laundered without gratitude, and slept in the guest room like she carried some contagious disease. "Good morning," Melina whispered, as she had every morning, hoping against hope for some crack in his armor. Paul turned the page of his newspaper with crisp finality, the sound like breaking bones in the devastating quiet. "Paul, please," she tried again, her voice barely audible. "We can't go on like this forever." His blue eyes lifted from the financial section to fix her with a stare so cold it made her shiver. "We're not going on like anything," he said with surgical precision. "There is no we anymore. There's me, living my life, and you, waiting for your lawyer to call about the settlement." The cruelty was breathtaking. This was the man who'd once promised to love her forever, who'd worshipped her body like a temple, who'd written invisible poetry on her skin with trembling fingers. Now he spoke to her like she was a business transaction he couldn't wait to complete. "I'm not asking for a settlement," Melina said quietly. I never was. Paul's laugh was bitter as winter. Right. You're just the wronged, innocent wife who happened to be caught in another man's arms. Tell me, was the money worth it? Was whatever he paid you worth destroying what we had? There was no money, Melina whispered, but she might as well have been talking to a stone wall. That afternoon, Melina sat in the polished office of Patterson and Associates, the city's most prestigious family law firm. She hadn't come here by choice. Desperation had driven her to seek answers about her legal rights, if only to understand what Paul meant when he talked about settlements and financial arrangements. Mrs. Hogan, Attorney Sarah Patterson said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany desk, I've reviewed your husband's financial documents and your marriage certificate. Given Connecticut's marital property laws and the specific structure of your husband's business partnerships, your situation is quite advantageous. Melina stared at the papers without really seeing them. I don't understand. When your husband restructured his companies 6 months after your marriage, he created what we call marital assets. The law is very clear. You're entitled to 50% of all assets acquired or restructured during the marriage. That includes the recent business expansion, 3 new properties, and approximately $40 million in investment accounts. The number hit Melina like a physical blow. 40 million? That's your half, Patterson clarified with a smile that suggested she'd seen many women in similar situations. The total marital estate is closer to 80 million. Your husband is considerably wealthier than most people realize. Melina felt dizzy. She'd known Paul was successful, but this level of wealth was incomprehensible. I never asked about his money. I didn't even know. Many wives don't, Patterson said kindly. Men like your husband often keep financial details private, but the law protects you, Mrs. Hogan. If you choose to file for divorce, you could walk away with enough money to live very comfortably for the rest of your life. I don't want a divorce, Melina said automatically. Patterson leaned back in her chair, studying Melina with sharp eyes. Mrs. Hogan, may I speak frankly? I've seen your situation many times. Wealthy men, suspicious mothers-in-law, manufactured evidence of infidelity. The pattern is unfortunately common. You think the photograph was fake? I think powerful families protect their assets by eliminating threats. And you, my dear, are perceived as a threat. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Melina stared at the legal documents, her mind reeling. $40 million. Enough to disappear, to start over somewhere far from Connecticut's social circles and Xiomara's poison. Enough to raise her baby. She was almost certain now that she was pregnant, without ever having to see the contempt in Paul's eyes again. If I wanted to, what would the process be? Simple, Patterson replied. We file the papers, present the evidence of marital assets, and negotiate the settlement. Given the circumstances, your husband's accusations against you, I could probably get you 60% instead of 50%, punitive damages for emotional distress. 60%, nearly $50 million. Freedom from humiliation, from fighting a battle she seemed destined to lose, from watching the man she loved treat her like a stranger. I need time to think, Melina said, gathering the papers with trembling hands. Of course. But Mrs. Hogan? Patterson's voice stopped her at the door. Don't wait too long. Men like your husband have ways of moving assets once they realize their wives understand the game. That evening, Melina sat in their bedroom, her bedroom now, staring at the positive pregnancy test she'd hidden in her jewelry box. 6 weeks along, according to her doctor's appointment that afternoon. 6 weeks of carrying Paul's child while he treated her like a diseased stranger. The legal documents lay spread across her vanity table like an escape route mapped in black and white. She could take the money and leave. Raise their child somewhere beautiful and peaceful, maybe California or even abroad. Never again would she have to endure Xiomara's subtle cruelties or see doubt in Paul's eyes when he looked at her. It would be so easy. Pack her things, sign the papers, disappear into a new life, funded by the very wealth Paul accused her of marrying him for. The irony was almost perfect, but as she traced the ultrasound image with her finger, Melina thought about the man Paul had been before his mother's poison took hold. The gentle giant who'd traced love letters on her skin, who'd called her his religion, who'd promised her forever and 3 days more. That man was still in there somewhere, buried under months of manipulation and manufactured doubt. The question was he worth fighting for, or should she save herself and their child from a battle that might destroy them all? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and for one wild moment her heart leapt with hope that it might be Paul, finally ready to listen. Instead, Xiomara glided into the room without waiting for permission, her expression one of false concern. "How are you holding up, dear?" she asked, settling into the chair by Melina's vanity like she belonged there. "I know today was difficult for you." Melina quickly covered the legal papers with a magazine, but not before Xiomara's sharp eyes caught sight of the law firm's letterhead. The older woman's smile turned predatory. "Consulting attorneys already? How practical of you." "I was just trying to understand my rights," Melina said carefully. "Of course you were." Xiomara's tone was honey over poison. "And I'm sure you discovered that you have quite a few. Connecticut can be very generous to abandoned wives." The word abandoned hit its target with surgical precision. Melina felt her composure crack slightly, and Xiomara leaned forward like a shark scenting blood. "You know, dear, there's still time to make this easy on everyone. A quiet divorce, a reasonable settlement, a fresh start somewhere new. Think of it as an opportunity. You could reinvent yourself completely." "I don't want to reinvent myself," Melina said quietly. "I want my husband back." "Your husband?" Xiomara laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Sweet child, that man died the moment he saw who you really were. What you see now is just Paul being too kind to throw you out without proper compensation." The cruelty was breathtaking, but Melina forced herself to remain calm. "You manufactured that photograph." "I protected my son," Xiomara corrected smoothly. "From a woman who would have eventually shown her true colors anyway. I simply accelerated the timeline. You destroyed an innocent marriage. I revealed an unsuitable one." Xiomara rose from the chair with fluid grace. "But it doesn't have to end badly for you, Melina. Take the money, make a new life. Let Paul find someone who actually belongs in his world." After Xiomara left, Melina sat surrounded by the tools of her own liberation. The legal documents that could free her, the pregnancy test that confirmed her greatest joy and deepest complication, the ultrasound image of a child who would grow up either as the bridge that healed their family or the casualty of their war. She thought about Sarah Patterson's words. "Don't wait too long. Men like your husband have ways of moving assets once they realize their wives understand the game." But she also thought about Paul's voice that morning, cold and dismissive. There is no we anymore. Maybe there wasn't. Maybe she was fighting for something that was already dead, sacrificing her dignity and her future for a love that had proven fragile enough to shatter at the first test. The $40 million could give her child everything, the best schools, the finest opportunities, a life free from the toxicity that had poisoned this house. All she had to do was sign the papers and walk away. But as she stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror, Melina saw not a broken woman ready to surrender, but a warrior gathering her strength for the battle of her life. She had 3 secrets that could change everything: her legal claim to Paul's wealth, proof of Xiomara's affair, and now the pregnancy that would shatter every assumption about her motives. The question was no longer whether to use these weapons, but when and how to deploy them for maximum impact. She could take the money and run, or she could fight for the love that had once seemed worth any sacrifice. Tomorrow was her birthday, and Paul had promised her a memorable celebration. He had no idea how memorable it was about to become. As she prepared for bed, Melina made her choice. Not the easy path of financial escape, but the harder road of fighting for what was rightfully hers. Not Paul's money, but Paul's heart. Outside, the storm that had been building for weeks was finally ready to break. Chapter 7. The Birthday Plot. The divorce papers lay spread across Paul's desk like surgical instruments prepared for an execution, and Melina's heart shattered as she watched her husband practice the speech that would end their marriage on her 28th birthday. "I've given this considerable thought," Paul rehearsed to Xiomara, his voice cold and clinical, "and I've decided our marriage was a mistake that needs to be corrected." "Perfect, darling," Xiomara purred from her position in the leather chair, coaching him like a director preparing her leading man for the performance of his life. "But remember, you must be firm. No wavering, no room for her tears to manipulate you." Melina pressed herself against the wall outside his study, invisible in the shadows, listening to them plan her destruction with the enthusiasm of generals plotting a siege. "The timing feels cruel," Paul said, and for a moment hope flickered in Melina's chest that some part of her gentle husband still existed beneath the ice. "Timing is everything," Xiomara corrected smoothly. "Her birthday dinner, surrounded by family, maximum emotional impact. She'll be expecting celebration, gifts, promises of forever. Instead, she gets reality." "She'll cry," Paul said quietly, and there was something in his voice, regret, satisfaction. Melina couldn't tell anymore. "Of course she will," Xiomara agreed with ruthless precision. "Women like her always do when their schemes collapse. The tears, the begging, the desperate promises. It's all performance, Paul. Don't let it sway you." "What if she tries to fight the divorce? She could make this ugly." Xiomara's laugh was silk, wrapped around a blade. "With what? She's a librarian who married above her station. You have the evidence of her affair, witnesses to her gold-digging behavior, proof of her deception. She has nothing." "Nothing." The word echoed in Melina's mind as she crept back upstairs, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach where Paul's child grew in secret. If only they knew what she actually possessed. Evidence of Xiomara's affair, legal rights to half Paul's fortune, and most powerfully, the baby that would change everything. 3 days. She had 3 days until her birthday dinner to prepare her counterattack. Over the next 72 hours, Melina became a woman transformed. The broken, pleading wife disappeared, replaced by someone harder, more calculating, more dangerous. She gathered her weapons with the precision of a strategist, preparing for the battle of her life. First, she visited her lawyer, not for divorce proceedings, but to confirm her rights under Connecticut's marital property laws. The meeting confirmed what she'd discovered in Paul's papers. She was entitled to 50% of everything acquired during their marriage, including his business partnerships and real estate holdings. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" her lawyer asked, studying the documentation. "This could get very messy, very quickly." "It already is messy," Melina replied with quiet steel. "I'm just evening the odds." Next, she retrieved the photographs she'd taken of Xiomara and Matteo's passionate encounter in the greenhouse. The images were crystal clear, Xiomara's face unmistakable as she surrendered to desire in the arms of their groundskeeper. The woman who preached about moral standards and appropriate behavior had been living a lie more elaborate than any she'd accused Melina of telling. Finally, she scheduled an appointment with Dr. Morrison for a comprehensive pregnancy examination, complete with ultrasound images and detailed medical documentation. At 7 weeks, Paul's child was clearly visible, a tiny miracle that would shatter every assumption about timing and manipulation. The birthday dinner was set for Saturday evening. Paul had invited his brother Marcus from California, his sister Eleanor from Boston, and several close family friends, all of them now poisoned against Melina by Xiomara's carefully orchestrated campaign. "Such a lovely gesture," Xiomara commented as she supervised the dinner preparations, playing the devoted mother-in-law to perfection. "Paul insists on making your birthday special despite everything you've put him through." The fake sweetness in her voice made Melina's skin crawl, but she smiled and nodded, playing her own role of the unknowing victim. Let them think she suspected nothing. Let them believe she was still the broken woman who'd been sobbing into her pillow for weeks. Friday evening, Paul made one final attempt at reconciliation, not out of love, but out of guilt. "Melina," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of what had once been their bedroom, "about tomorrow night." "Yes?" She looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read, her expression carefully neutral. "I want you to know that this isn't easy for me either." For a moment, she saw a flash of the man she'd married, vulnerable, conflicted, human. Then Xiomara's poison reasserted itself, and his face hardened again. "But it has to be done," he continued. "We can't build a life on lies." "No," Melina agreed quietly. "We can't." Paul studied her face, perhaps looking for signs of the breakdown he expected, the tears and pleading Xiomara had predicted. Instead, he found only calm acceptance, which seemed to unsettle him more than hysteria would have. "I've arranged for you to stay at the Marriott downtown until you find permanent accommodations," he said, his voice carefully gentle. "And I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. I'm not a monster, Melina." "I know," she replied, and meant it. Paul wasn't a monster. He was a victim of masterful manipulation, just as she was. The real monster was the woman downstairs, probably listening at the door to make sure her son followed the script she'd written. "The papers will be ready tomorrow after dinner," Paul continued. "My lawyer says it should be straightforward given the circumstances." "I understand." Her calm acceptance clearly disturbed him. He'd been prepared for dramatics, not dignity. That's it?" No arguments. No attempts to change my mind. Would it matter if I tried? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Paul's jaw worked silently for a moment, then he shook his head. "Number." It wouldn't. After he left, Melina sat in the darkness and felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. Tomorrow, they would gather to celebrate what they thought was her destruction. Instead, they would witness her resurrection. Saturday dawned grey and forbidding, the sky pregnant with storms that matched the tempest brewing inside their elegant home. Melina dressed carefully in the white silk dress she'd worn to their engagement party, the one Paul had said made her look like an angel. Today, she would be an avenging angel. As evening approached, the guests began arriving. Marcus brought his wife Sandra, both of them greeting Melina with the uncomfortable politeness reserved for someone they pitied. Elena came alone, her eyes cold with the righteous anger of a sister protecting her wounded brother. The family friends, the Harrisons, the Mitchells, the Adamses, all wore expressions of solemn sympathy, like mourners at a funeral, which, in a way, they were. "Happy birthday, dear," Mrs. Harrison said with false brightness, pressing a small wrapped gift into Melina's hands. "I do hope this year brings you clarity." "Thank you," Melina replied with genuine warmth. "I expect this birthday to be very illuminating indeed." As they gathered in the dining room, Melina took her place at the table like a queen taking her throne. The conversation was stilted, filled with the kind of careful politeness that surrounded scandal. Paul sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of grim determination, while Xiomara played the gracious hostess with Oscar-worthy performance. "Shall we have dessert before the birthday surprises?" Xiomara suggested, her voice honey over poison. Actually, Melina said, rising gracefully from her chair, I have some surprises of my own, birthday gifts, you might say, for all of you. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her with confused anticipation. Paul's face went pale. This wasn't part of the script. 3 gifts, actually, Melina continued, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush. 3 truths that I think you all deserve to hear before we conclude this evening. Xiomara's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of something that might have been fear, but she recovered quickly, her smile never wavering. How thoughtful, dear, she said with carefully controlled sweetness. Though perhaps we should stick to the planned agenda. Oh, I think everyone will want to hear this, Melina said with deadly calm. After all, they've come so far to be here for my special day. She moved to the sideboard where she'd placed 3 manila envelopes, each one containing the ammunition that would change everything. The room held its collective breath as she lifted the first envelope with ceremonial precision. My first gift, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose, is truth. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for the storm that was about to break over their carefully constructed lies. Chapter 8. The words that shattered everything. The crystal wineglass slipped from Melina's trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound lost beneath the crushing weight of the words that drifted from Paul's study like poison through the morning air. When I divorce her on her birthday, she will cry like the pathetic gold digger she is, and finally everyone will see what I was too blind to recognize. Paul's voice carried clearly through the partially open door, each word delivered with surgical precision to his mother, who was no doubt drinking in every syllable of his planned cruelty like vintage wine. Perfect, darling, Xiomara's purr of satisfaction followed. The timing is exquisite. She'll be expecting celebration, perhaps even thinking she's won you back with her pitiful attempts at reconciliation. Instead, she'll be publicly humiliated in front of everyone who matters. Melina pressed herself against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to support her as she listened to the man she'd worshipped plan her destruction with the enthusiasm of someone planning a pleasant dinner party. I almost feel sorry for her, Paul continued, and there was something in his voice that might have been regret, or perhaps just satisfaction at a job well done. She actually believes she can manipulate me with those wounded doe eyes and trembling lips. Did you see her last night? Trying to look brave and dignified when she's nothing but a scheming little— Now, Xiomara interrupted smoothly. We mustn't be crude, even when describing her. After all, she did serve her purpose. She taught you valuable lessons about trust and the dangers of thinking with your heart instead of your head. Expensive lessons, Paul replied with bitter humor. But worth it, I suppose. At least now I know what real manipulation looks like. The way she pretended to be innocent, the calculated tears, the perfect timing of every gesture designed to make me feel guilty for doubting her. Melina's heart shattered into so many pieces, she wondered if it would ever beat normally again. This was what Paul truly thought of her, that every tear had been calculated, every moment of pain performed for his benefit, every "I love you" part of an elaborate con game. She'll probably try to claim she's pregnant, Xiomara said with casual cruelty. That's what desperate women do when they feel their meal ticket slipping away. You'll need to be prepared for that particular piece of theater. Let her try. Paul's voice hardened with contempt. I haven't touched her in weeks. If she claims to be carrying my child, it will just prove what we already know about her character. The irony was devastating. Melina was indeed pregnant with Paul's child, conceived during those passionate nights when he still loved her, still trusted her, still whispered poetry against her skin. But his timeline was wrong, his memories clouded by Xiomara's poison. He didn't remember their last night together 3 weeks ago, when grief and alcohol had driven him to seek comfort in her arms one final time before hate consumed him completely. "The birthday dinner will be perfect," Xiomara continued with obvious relish. "All those people who've been whispering about the situation finally getting confirmation of what they suspected. Your dignity restored, her true nature exposed, justice served." "She deserves it," Paul said with finality. "She made her choices when she decided to betray me. Everything that happens now is the consequence of her own actions." Melina fled upstairs before she could hear any more, her vision blurred by tears of rage and heartbreak. In their bedroom, her bedroom now, she stared at her reflection and saw a woman she barely recognized, thin, hollow-eyed, worn down by weeks of psychological warfare. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. But as she wiped away her tears, something cold and hard crystallized in her chest. If Paul wanted to see her as a calculating manipulator, if he truly believed she was capable of such elaborate deception, then perhaps it was time to give him exactly what he expected. The morning brought fresh humiliation as Xiomara appeared in the kitchen wearing the smile of someone savoring an upcoming victory. "Good morning, dear," she sang, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Are you looking forward to your special day? Paul has been working so hard on your surprise." "I'm sure he has," Melina replied evenly, her voice betraying nothing of the storm raging inside her. "I do hope you won't make a scene tonight," Xiomara continued, arranging white orchids, Paul's old favorite, in a crystal vase. "The family has been through quite enough drama lately, don't you think?" "Oh, I don't think anyone will be disappointed by tonight's entertainment," Melina said with quiet steel. Something in her tone made Xiomara look up sharply, her predator's instincts suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" "Just that birthdays are often full of surprises," Melina replied innocently. "You never know what gifts the day might bring." The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness as Melina made her final preparations. She placed the 3 manila envelopes on the sideboard in the dining room, each one labeled with elegant script: truth, justice, and consequences. As evening approached, she dressed in the white silk dress from their engagement party, the one Paul had said made her look angelic. Tonight, she would be an angel of revelation, bringing divine justice to those who had tried to destroy her. The guests arrived precisely at 7, each one greeting her with the uncomfortable mixture of pity and anticipation that surrounded scandal. Paul's brother Marcus looked genuinely sorry for her, while his sister Eleanor could barely mask her satisfaction at seeing the woman who had trapped their brother finally getting her comeuppance. Dinner was exquisite torture, course after course of elaborate food that tasted like ashes in her mouth, while conversation swirled around neutral topics, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. Paul sat at the head of the table like a king preparing to dispense justice, while Xiomara played the gracious hostess with Academy Award-worthy performance. As dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate torte that Melina had made herself, one last gesture of the loving wife she'd tried to be. Paul cleared his throat with obvious nervousness. "Before we get to birthday gifts," he began, his prepared speech rolling off his tongue with rehearsed precision, "I have something important to share with everyone." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him with rapt attention. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the public execution that would restore Paul's dignity and confirm all their whispered suspicions about his scheming wife. "Over the past few months," Paul continued, his voice gaining strength, "I've learned some difficult truths about trust, about deception, about the difference between love and manipulation." Melina watched him with perfect composure, her face a mask of serene calm that seemed to unnerve him. This wasn't the breakdown he'd expected, the tears and pleading that would validate his cruelty. "I've discovered that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal," Paul said, his gaze fixed on her with laser intensity. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is acknowledge when a mistake has been made and take steps to correct it. How wise, Melina said softly, her first words since dinner began. I couldn't agree more about correcting mistakes. Paul blinked, clearly thrown by her calm agreement. Which is why, he continued, stumbling slightly over his rehearsed lines, I've decided that, actually, Melina interrupted, rising gracefully from her chair. Before you share your gift with everyone, I'd like to present mine. After all, it is my birthday. The room erupted in confused murmurs as she moved to the sideboard with fluid grace, her 3 envelopes waiting like loaded weapons. Paul's face went pale. This wasn't part of the script. Melina, Xiomara's voice carried a note of warning. Perhaps we should let Paul finish what he was saying. Oh, but I think my gifts will put everything in perfect perspective, Melina said with deadly sweetness. 3 truths that will illuminate this entire situation. She lifted the first envelope, labeled Truth, and faced the room with the poise of someone who had nothing left to lose. My first gift tonight, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, is the legal documentation proving that under Connecticut's marital property laws, I am entitled to exactly 50% of everything my husband owns. Gasps echoed around the table as she withdrew the partnership agreements and property deeds, spreading them across the white tablecloth like battle plans. The construction company, the investment portfolio, the real estate holdings, even this house, half of it all belongs to me by right of marriage. Paul's face went white as understanding dawned. That's impossible. Those documents are private. Nothing between spouses is private, Melina corrected with surgical precision. As your legal wife, I have every right to know about our shared assets, assets that I never asked about, never tried to access, never even wanted, until now. Xiomara's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You little... but we're not finished, Melina said, lifting the second envelope labeled Justice. My second gift tonight is truth about character, about moral standards, about the difference between public virtue and private vice. She withdrew the photographs of Xiomara and Matteo in their passionate embrace, each image crystal clear and undeniably authentic. The room erupted in shocked gasps and horrified whispers as the pictures passed from hand to hand. These were taken last week in our greenhouse, Melina announced calmly. I think they speak for themselves about who in this room has been living a lie. Xiomara's face drained of all color as her carefully constructed image crumbled around her. Those are fake, she gasped. Doctored, manipulated, like the photograph you showed Paul of me? Melina asked with razor-sharp precision. The one that convinced him I was having an affair? Tell me, how long have you been sleeping with our groundskeeper while preaching to everyone else about moral standards? The silence was deafening as 30 years of Xiomara's reputation dissolved in an instant. Paul stared at his mother with dawning horror, the pieces of a much larger puzzle finally clicking into place. And now, Melina said, lifting the final envelope labeled Consequences, my third and final gift. Her hands trembled slightly as she withdrew the ultrasound images, the medical documentation, the proof of the miracle growing inside her. I'm pregnant, she announced simply. 8 weeks along with Paul's child, conceived during our marriage, documented by medical professionals, and absolutely, undeniably real. The room exploded into chaos as the full implications hit everyone simultaneously. Paul stared at the ultrasound images like they were written in a foreign language, his entire world view crashing down around him. That's impossible, he whispered. It's been weeks since we... Check the dates, Paul, Melina said quietly. All of them. The conception date, the medical timeline. Remember 2 months ago, before the photograph, before the suspicion. Remember the night you came home stressed about the Morrison contract, and I held you until the world made sense again. That's when your child was conceived, when you still loved me." Understanding dawned in Paul's eyes like a horrific sunrise as he realized the truth. He had been wrong about everything. The wife he'd been planning to destroy was innocent, pregnant with his child, and had just revealed herself to be far more powerful than anyone had imagined. But as Melina looked around the table at the wreckage of lies and manipulation, she felt no victory, only the hollow satisfaction of justice served cold. The storm that had been building for months had finally broken, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 9. The birthday that broke the universe. The silence that followed Melina's revelations was the kind that comes after explosions, when the world holds its breath to assess the damage and count the casualties scattered across the wreckage of what used to be truth. Paul stared at the ultrasound images in his trembling hands like they were evidence of his own damnation, his face cycling through shock, horror, and dawning comprehension of the magnitude of his betrayal. The tiny form on the grainy black and white photo, his child, their child, seemed to mock every cruel word he'd spoken, every cold glance he'd delivered, every moment he'd treated the mother of his baby like a diseased stranger. 10 weeks, he whispered, his voice broken glass and ashes. 10 weeks, and oh God, what have I done? Xiomara sat frozen in her chair like a statue of humiliation, the affair photographs scattered around her plate like accusations made flesh. 30 years of carefully crafted moral superiority had crumbled in 30 seconds, leaving her exposed as the hypocrite and manipulator she'd always been. "This can't be happening," she breathed, her hands shaking as she reached for the damning images. "This is all lies, fabrication, desperate attempts to what?" Melina's voice cut through the chaos like a blade forged in fire. "To defend myself against your calculated destruction, to reveal the truth about your affair while you accused me of adultery, to protect the child you would have convinced its father to abandon." The room erupted in a cacophony of shocked whispers and horrified gasps as the full scope of Xiomara's manipulation became clear to everyone present. Marcus sat back in his chair like he'd been physically struck, staring at his mother with dawning revulsion. "You did this," he said quietly, his voice thick with disgust. "You orchestrated all of this. The suspicions, the doubts, the evidence against Melina, you manufactured it all." "I was protecting Paul." Xiomara protested weakly, but her voice carried no conviction. "She married him for money. Anyone could see that." "The only person who married for money," Elena interrupted with icy precision, "is apparently you, Mother. How long have you been planning to use Matteo to control Paul once his marriage was destroyed?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Xiomara's face crumpled as she realized that even her own children now saw her clearly, stripped of the maternal authority she'd wielded like a weapon. "I love Paul," she whispered desperately. "Everything I did was for his own good." "You loved controlling Paul," Melina corrected with devastating calm. "You couldn't stand that he'd found happiness without your permission, love that didn't require your approval, so you decided to destroy it rather than lose your hold on him." Paul looked up from the ultrasound images, his blue eyes now swimming with tears of horror and regret. "Melina, how can you ever forgive me? How can I ever make this right?" But Melina's expression remained granite hard, her forgiveness not so easily purchased with belated remorse. 3 weeks ago, you could have asked me about the photograph. You could have trusted the woman who'd loved you faithfully for 3 years. Instead, you chose to believe the worst possible interpretation of everything I did. I was manipulated. We were both manipulated. Melina cut him off sharply. The difference is that when I was hurt and confused, I still chose to love you. When you were hurt and confused, you chose to hate me. The truth of her words hit Paul like physical blows. He'd had choices every step of the way, to trust or doubt, to communicate or withdraw, to love or punish. At every crucial moment he'd chosen the path that led away from his wife and toward his mother's poison. "The baby," he whispered, staring again at the ultrasound. "Our baby. I would have divorced you while you were carrying our child." "Yes," Melina agreed simply. "You would have. You were planning to humiliate me publicly, destroy my reputation, and send me away with nothing while your child grew inside me. That's who you became under your mother's influence." Mrs. Harrison cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should leave you to discuss this privately." "No," Melina said firmly. "Stay. You all came here tonight expecting a show, expecting to witness my destruction and Paul's righteousness. You should see how the story really ends." She turned to face the assembled guests with queenly dignity, her white dress making her look like an avenging angel dispensing divine justice. "For months, you've all whispered about me behind closed doors. The gold digger who trapped poor Paul, the social climber who didn't belong in your world, the calculating woman who married above her station. Well, now you know the truth." Her gaze swept the room, making each person squirm under the weight of their own complicity in her persecution. "I never wanted Paul's money. I never asked about his finances. I never tried to access his accounts or investigate his assets. The only reason I know about my legal rights now is because I needed weapons to defend myself against a war I never wanted to fight." "Melina," Paul stood on unsteady legs, reaching toward her like a drowning man grasping for salvation. "Please, let me try to explain." "Explain what?" Her voice cracked like a whip. "How quickly you believed I was capable of adultery. How easily you were convinced I'd married you for money. How thoroughly you accepted that every loving gesture I'd ever made was calculated manipulation." Paul's face crumpled as the full weight of his betrayal crashed down on him. "I was hurt. I was confused. Mother showed me that photograph, and it looked so real." "It looked real because you wanted it to be real," Melina said with surgical precision. "Because believing I was a liar was easier than admitting your mother had been poisoning our marriage from day one." Xiomara suddenly lurched to her feet, her face flushed with desperation and rage. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this little performance makes you the victim instead of the opportunist we all know you are? Sit down, Mother." Paul's voice carried a note of steel that no one had ever heard before. "You've done enough damage. I won't be silenced by some little nobody who—" "You will be silent," Paul roared, his composure finally shattering completely. "For months, you've filled my head with poison about the woman I love. You made me doubt her loyalty, question her motives, treat her like a criminal in her own home. You destroyed my marriage with lies. She doesn't belong here," Xiomara screamed back, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "She's beneath you, beneath this family, beneath everything we represent." "What we represent?" Paul's laugh was hollow and bitter. "We represent hypocrisy, manipulation, and cruelty disguised as moral superiority. If that's what this family stands for, then maybe it's time for new representation." The words hit Xiomara like physical blows, and she stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if her heart was failing. The woman who'd orchestrated months of psychological warfare suddenly looked every one of her 62 years, aged by the collapse of her carefully constructed world. "Paul," she gasped, reaching toward him with desperate hands. "You can't mean that. I'm your mother. Everything I did was out of love." "Love doesn't destroy," Paul said with quiet finality. "Love doesn't manipulate or scheme or lie. What you did wasn't love, Mother. It was possession, and it ends now." Xiomara's face went white as the implications sank in. She was losing her son, her control, her carefully crafted image. Everything she'd fought to protect was crumbling around her. "You'll regret this," she whispered, but there was no power left in her threats. When she shows her true colors, when she takes you for everything you're worth, you'll remember that I tried to warn you." "The only true colors revealed tonight," Marcus said quietly, "were yours, Mother, and they're uglier than any of us imagined." Xiomara looked around the table at the faces that had once shown her respect and deference, now reflecting only disgust and disappointment. Even her own children looked at her like she was a stranger, someone they'd never really known. "I need air," she gasped, stumbling toward the French doors that led to the terrace. "I need—" She never finished the sentence. Instead, she collapsed onto the marble floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut, her body convulsing as her heart struggled to process the complete destruction of her world. "Call an ambulance!" Paul shouted, dropping to his knees beside his mother's writhing form. But even as he tried to help her, his eyes kept finding Melina's face, searching for some sign that forgiveness might be possible. Melina stood perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold with the detached calm of someone who'd survived their own execution. She felt no satisfaction at Xiomara's collapse, no victory in her enemy's downfall. She felt nothing but the hollow emptiness that came after a war where everyone lost something precious. As the paramedics arrived and loaded Xiomara onto a stretcher, Paul caught Melina's hand with desperate fingers. "Don't leave," he begged, his voice raw with unshed tears. "Please, we can fix this. We can make it right." Melina looked down at their joined hands, the same hands that had once traced love letters on her skin, that had held her like she was made of starlight, that had pushed her away when doubt poisoned his heart. "Can we?" she asked quietly. "Can you ever look at me again without remembering how quickly you believed the worst? Can I ever trust you again, knowing how easily your love turned to hatred?" Paul's face crumpled as the magnitude of what they'd lost hit him fully. "I don't know," he whispered with brutal honesty. "But I want to try. Our baby deserves parents who try." "Our baby deserves parents who trust each other," Melina replied, gently pulling her hand free from his grasp. "And right now, we don't even know if that's possible." As the ambulance pulled away with Xiomara, and the guests scattered like leaves before a storm, Paul and Melina stood in their ruined dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of their marriage. They had revealed all the lies, exposed all the manipulation, and destroyed the woman who'd tried to tear them apart. But the hardest battle still lay ahead, learning whether love could survive the poison that had been pumped into its veins, whether trust could be rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, whether two wounded hearts could find their way back to each other across the chasm of pain that stretched between them. The storm had finally broken, but the aftermath would determine whether anything beautiful could grow from the devastation it left behind. Chapter 10. Love Conquers. All the hospital rooms smelled of disinfectant and shattered pride, and Xiomara Hogan looked smaller than Melina had ever seen her, diminished by the weight of her exposed sins and the machines monitoring her struggling heart. "She's stable," Dr. Martinez explained to Paul and Melina as they stood in the hallway outside the cardiac unit. "The heart attack was severe, but not fatal. She'll recover physically, though the emotional trauma—" He shrugged diplomatically. Paul stared through the window at his mother, who lay unconscious, her silver hair lank against the white pillow. 3 days had passed since the birthday dinner that exposed every lie. 3 days of Xiomara fighting for her life, while Paul fought for his soul. "She's been asking for you," he said quietly to Melina, his voice heavy with exhaustion and guilt. "Both of us, actually." Melina placed a protective hand on her growing belly, where their child, now safely past the first trimester, continued to thrive despite the chaos surrounding its conception. What could she possibly have to say now? "I don't know," Paul admitted. "But I think we need to hear it. For our sake, if not hers." When they entered the room together, Xiomara's eyes fluttered open, focusing first on Paul, then on Melina. For a moment, the old calculation flickered there, the predator's instinct to find weakness and exploit it. Then awareness dawned, and something that looked like genuine remorse replaced the cunning. "You came," she whispered, her voice paper-thin and fragile. "We came," Paul confirmed, but he stayed close to Melina, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Xiomara's gaze shifted to Melina's barely visible pregnancy bump, and her face crumpled. "I almost destroyed that child's family before it even had a chance to exist." "You did destroy it," Melina said quietly. "The question is whether anything can be rebuilt from the wreckage." "You have every right to hate me," Xiomara continued, tears slipping down her pale cheeks. "I fabricated evidence, manipulated my own son, tried to drive you away from the man you love. I became a monster." Paul moved closer to the bed, his expression a mixture of pain and confusion. "Why, Mother? Why did you do it?" "Because I was terrified," Xiomara admitted with brutal honesty. "Terrified of losing my place in your life, terrified of becoming irrelevant, terrified that your love for her meant less love for me." She looked directly at Melina. "I saw your strength from the beginning. The way Paul looked at you, the way you fit into his life so naturally. And instead of welcoming the woman who made my son happy, I decided to eliminate the threat to my position." "Love isn't finite," Melina said, echoing words Xiomara had once spoken. "There was room in Paul's heart for both of us." "I know that now," Xiomara whispered, "but I was too proud, too controlling, too afraid to share him. So I convinced myself you were the problem, that you were using him, that destroying your marriage would save him." Her voice broke completely. "I was wrong about everything." Dr. Martinez returned with discharge papers and medication instructions. "She can go home tomorrow," he told Paul, "but she'll need care during her recovery. Family support is crucial for cardiac patients." Paul nodded absently, but Melina could see the war raging behind his eyes. His mother was physically broken, apparently repentant, and medically vulnerable. The old Paul would have brought her home without question, would have spent the next months caring for her, would have forgiven her because she was family. But this Paul had watched his wife suffer for months of psychological torture. This Paul had seen the ultrasound of the child he'd almost abandoned. This Paul had to choose between the easy path of family obligation and the harder road of protecting the family he'd almost lost. Over the following days, as Xiomara recovered in the hospital, Paul wrestled with the most difficult decision of his life. She was his mother, the woman who'd raised him, loved him, shaped him into the man he'd become. But she was also the architect of his marriage's near destruction, the author of months of pain for the woman carrying his child. "What do you want me to do?" Paul asked Melina one evening as they sat in their garden, the same garden where Xiomara's affair had been conducted in secret. "I want you to choose," Melina replied simply. "Not what's expected, not what's easy, not what preserves family harmony. I want you to choose what's right." "She's sick, Melina. She's broken. How can I abandon her now?" "I'm not asking you to abandon her," Melina clarified. "I'm asking you to protect us, our marriage, our child, our future. Your mother proved she's willing to destroy all of that to maintain control over you. What makes you think she won't try again?" Paul was quiet for a long time, staring at the roses they'd planted together during happier times. "She seems genuinely sorry. She seemed genuinely concerned for your welfare when she was fabricating evidence against me," Melina pointed out gently. "Your mother is a gifted actress, Paul. Her repentance might be real, or it might be another performance designed to regain access to your life." The truth of those words settled between them like a cold weight. Paul had been expertly manipulated once. How could he be certain it wasn't happening again? The test came when Xiomara was discharged from the hospital. Instead of the expected invitation to recover at their home, Paul arranged for her to stay at an extended care facility, comfortable, well-staffed, but separate from their lives. "You can't be serious," Xiomara said when he explained the arrangements, her facade of weakness slipping to reveal flashes of the old controlling nature. I'm your mother, Paul. I belong with family during my recovery. You stopped being family the moment you decided to destroy my marriage, Paul replied with quiet steel. I'll ensure you have the best care possible, but you won't be welcome in our home until you've proven, through actions, not words, that you've genuinely changed. Xiomara's mask fell away completely, revealing the calculating woman beneath. You're letting her turn you against me, she accused. Can't you see what she's doing? She's isolating you from your own mother. No, Paul said firmly. I'm protecting my wife and child from someone who's already proven they can't be trusted. You did this to yourself, Mother. These are the consequences of your choices. I'm sick, Paul. I nearly died. And I'm sorry for that, but being sick doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't rebuild the trust you shattered or heal the pain you caused. Paul's voice remained steady, but Melina could see the cost of this confrontation in the lines around his eyes. If you want to be part of our lives again, you'll have to earn it. Over the following months, as Melina's pregnancy progressed and their marriage slowly healed, Paul proved his commitment through 1,000 small actions. He blocked Xiomara's phone calls when they became manipulative. He refused her guilt-laden letters about being abandoned by her ungrateful son. He chose therapy sessions with Melina over visiting hours with his mother. The final test came when Grace was born, a perfect daughter with Paul's blue eyes and Melina's stubborn chin. Xiomara sent flowers to the hospital with a card begging to meet her granddaughter, promising she'd changed, pleading for one more chance. It's your decision, Paul told Melina as they sat in her hospital room, their newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. She's Grace's grandmother, but she's also the woman who tried to destroy our family. I'll support whatever you choose. Melina looked down at their perfect child, then up at the man who'd finally learned to put their marriage first. She can meet Grace, she decided, but only in public places, only with both of us present, and only if she agrees to family counseling. Real change requires accountability, not just apologies. Paul nodded, understanding the wisdom in her conditions. And if she refuses? Then she's choosing her pride over her granddaughter, Melina replied simply. Some bridges can be rebuilt, Paul, but only if both sides are willing to do the work. Xiomara predictably refused the conditions. She wanted forgiveness without accountability, access without oversight, family privileges without proving she'd changed. When Paul held firm to the boundaries they'd established, she accused him of being brainwashed by his wife and threatened to sue for grandparents' rights. Let her try, Paul said calmly when their lawyer informed them of Xiomara's threat. Any court that sees the evidence of what she did to our marriage will understand why we're protecting our child. 2 years later, as they renewed their vows in the same garden where they'd scattered their broken dreams and grown new ones, Paul spoke the words that had taken him too long to learn. I promise to believe in you when the world says doubt. I promise to trust your heart when others question your motives. I promise to fight for us, not against us, for all the days of our lives. And Melina, radiant in white silk with Grace on her hip and another child growing beneath her heart, whispered back the words that had saved them both. Forever and 3 days more. Xiomara remained in the extended care facility, surrounded by comfortable luxury, but isolated from the family she'd tried to control. Some of Paul's relatives criticized his cruelty toward his aging mother, but he'd learned that protecting the people you love sometimes required disappointing the people who claim to love you. Love had conquered all, not through forgiveness without justice, not through maintaining toxic family peace, but through the courage to choose what was right over what was easy. Paul had learned that true strength meant setting boundaries with people who would destroy you, even when those people were family. And in the end, that was enough. It was everything. Grace's laughter filled their garden as she chased butterflies among the roses, and Paul caught Melina's hand, spinning her around like they were still newlyweds, discovering the power of their connection. "No regrets?" Melina asked, thinking of the mother-in-law who'd been banished from their happiness. "Only one," Paul replied, pulling her close for a kiss that still made her knees weak after all these years. "That I didn't choose you over her from the very beginning." "You choose me now," Melina said softly. "Every day, in every decision, you choose us. That's what matters." And as the sun set over their garden, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, they knew that love hadn't just conquered all, it had transformed them into people strong enough to protect it. "You were afraid," Melina said quietly, "afraid of losing control of your son, afraid of becoming irrelevant, afraid that his love for me meant less love for you." "Love isn't finite," Xiomara admitted with bitter wisdom. "I know that now, but I didn't then. I saw you taking him away from me, and I became someone I don't recognize. You became someone who was willing to destroy an innocent woman to maintain control." "Yes." The admission was exhaled like a final breath. "I saw your strength from the beginning. The way Paul looked at you, the way you fit into his life so naturally. And instead of welcoming the woman who made my son happy, I decided to eliminate the threat to my position." Melina leaned forward slightly, studying the broken woman before her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying," Xiomara said simply, "and I want to die with whatever honor I can salvage. Because my son loves you more than life itself, and I destroyed that love with my poison. Because you're carrying my grandchild, and I want that baby to know that in the end, its grandmother chose truth over pride." Tears slipped down Xiomara's pale cheeks as she continued. "I fabricated the evidence against you. I convinced Matteo to help me stage those photographs, told him it was to protect Paul from a gold digger. I manipulated every situation, twisted every innocent moment into something sinister." "I know," Melina said softly. "Do you know why?" Xiomara's voice cracked with emotion. "Because I was jealous, not of your relationship with Paul, of who you are. Your strength, your dignity, your capacity for love without condition. I saw what I could never be, and I decided to destroy it rather than admire it." The confession hung between them like a prayer for absolution that Melina wasn't sure she could grant. "What do you want from me?" Melina asked finally. "Nothing," Xiomara whispered. "I want to give you something, my blessing, my apology, and my promise that Paul's heart is truer than mine ever was. I broke him, Melina, but the pieces are still good, still worth rebuilding. He chose to believe your lies, because I'm a master manipulator who spent 62 years perfecting the art of controlling people through love and guilt." Xiomara's smile was sad and knowing. Paul's only crime was loving his mother too much to see her clearly. "Don't let my sins rob you both of the happiness you deserve." A soft knock interrupted them, and Paul appeared in the doorway with Dr. Martinez, whose expression told its own story. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently. "Her condition has stabilized, but she's had another episode. The next few hours will be critical." But Xiomara wasn't dying, not yet. Over the following weeks, she made a slow but steady recovery, her heart damaged but still beating. And with her physical recovery came the real test of everyone's character. Paul stood at his mother's bedside, watching her sleep, wrestling with the most difficult decision of his life. She was his mother, the woman who'd raised him, loved him, shaped him into the man he'd become. But she was also the architect of his marriage's near destruction. "What do you want me to do?" he asked Melina one evening as they sat in their garden. "I want you to choose," Melina replied simply. "Not what's expected, not what's easy, not what preserves family harmony. I want you to choose what's right. She's recovering, Melina. She's broken, but she's going to live. How can I abandon her now? I'm not asking you to abandon her, Melina clarified. I'm asking you to protect us, our marriage, our child, our future. Your mother proved she's willing to destroy all of that to maintain control over you. What makes you think she won't try again? When Xiomara was discharged from the hospital, Paul made his choice. Instead of bringing her home, he arranged for her care at an extended facility, comfortable, well-staffed, but separate from their lives. You can't be serious, Xiomara said when he explained the arrangements, her facade of weakness slipping. I'm your mother, Paul. I belong with family. You stopped being family the moment you decided to destroy my marriage, Paul replied with quiet steel. I'll ensure you have the best care, but you won't be welcome in our home until you've proven, through actions, not words, that you've genuinely changed. Xiomara's mask fell away completely. You're letting her turn you against me. No, Paul said firmly. I'm protecting my wife and child from someone who's proven they can't be trusted. You did this to yourself, mother. Over the months that followed, as Melina's pregnancy progressed, Paul proved his commitment through countless choices. He blocked manipulative phone calls. He refused guilt-laden letters. He chose therapy sessions with Melina over visiting his mother. When Grace was born, Xiomara sent flowers begging to meet her granddaughter. Paul and Melina set strict conditions: public meetings only, both parents present, family counseling required. Xiomara refused, choosing pride over her grandchild. 2 years later, as they renewed their vows in their garden, Paul spoke the words he'd finally learned. I promise to believe in you when the world says doubt. I promise to trust your heart when others question your motives. I promise to fight for us, not against us, for all the days of our lives. And Melina whispered back, forever and 3 days more. Xiomara remained in care, comfortable but alone, having chosen control over connection. Paul had learned that protecting love sometimes meant disappointing family. Love had conquered all, not through easy forgiveness, but through the courage to choose what was right over what was expected, and that was enough. It was everything.